Hi again, everybody. I've come into the conservatory because, as you might be able to see behind me, it's very windy outside, very noisy. So now it's a bit echoey in here, but I hope that's okay, and you can engage with our reflections on the book of Ephesians. We're up to chapter 4 and verse 20. So the last couple of days we've been thinking about those who don't live as Christians, those who are living in the futility of their thinking and their sinful lives. As we reach verse 20, we hear something different. That, however, that way of thinking, is not the way of life you learned when you heard about Christ and were taught in him in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. God is love is a very common phrase that we use, and I think what could perhaps be equally common, if only we used it more, if that makes sense, is that Jesus is truth. Jesus came to communicate the truth of God's love and what that means in terms of how we live as his children. The whole of the book of Ephesians, as a recent sermon series in Nailsy reflected on, is about living as children of God. And what Jesus came to share with us is the truth of what that means, how we can live as true disciples, true family of our wonderful God. And so what Paul is getting at here is that those ways that he's just been criticising, where he's talked about futility of thinking, where he's talked about darkened understanding, ignorance, hardening of hearts and that sort of thing, all of that is not the way of life that we learned through Christ. Now, the truth of that statement assumes, of course, that we have learned it. And I think sometimes maybe we're tempted to live in a way that indicates we haven't fully learned it. We are still tempted or drawn back into the futility of thinking that comes from our kind of pre-Christian time, that time before we accepted the love of Christ for ourselves. But what Paul is getting at here in talking to the community of God's people is, if we're seeking to live as children of God, then this is the way of thinking that we are now to adopt. Let's do away with the old stuff. Let's do away with the futile stuff. And let's instead focus in on truth, the truth that we find in the presence and the person and the teaching of Jesus. Out of that comes harmony with God, comes the ability to live well as God's children. Let's pray. Father, thank you that you have taught us in accordance with the truth that is in Jesus. Help us to grasp that truth, to live by that truth, and to show others what it means to live for you in truth. Amen. God bless you. See you again tomorrow, I hope. Take care.